How far would you go to save your own child, especially when she's the one who warns you to act normal after being missing for a year? When two masked men forced me into a strange SUV and I found my daughter waiting, I knew there were secrets far darker than her disappearance. But I never expected my quiet, careful actions would one day bring down the very man everyone thought untouchable. My son-in-law. The morning air was crisp against my face as I rounded the familiar bend of Oakwood Park's jogging trail. At 56, I wasn't the fastest runner, but I was consistent. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, rain or shine, I completed my 3-mile circuit. It was one of the few constants in my life since Madeline disappeared. Franklin Harper. That's me. Frank to most people. Civil engineer by trade, methodical by nature. The kind of man who checks his tire pressure monthly and keeps his receipts organized in labeled folders. Patricia, my ex-wife, used to call it boring. Victor, my son-in-law, had stronger words for it. I was thinking about Maddie when the black SUV pulled alongside me. Strange, since this section of the trail was usually empty at this hour. The vehicle matched my pace for several yards before two men in ski masks jumped out. "Get in," the taller one commanded, grabbing my arm with surprising force. My engineering mind kicked in automatically, cataloging details even as panic flooded my system. Late-model Suburban, tinted windows, no visible license plate. The shorter man was Hispanic, maybe mid-30s, with calloused hands. The taller one spoke with a slight accent I couldn't place. They shoved me into the back seat, and my heart nearly stopped. "Hello, Dad." Madeline sat in the far corner, thinner than I remembered, her auburn hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She looked older, worn down by whatever she'd endured this past year. But her green eyes, my eyes, still held that spark of intelligence that had made her valedictorian at Stanford. "Maddie?" My voice cracked. "Oh God, Maddie, where have you been? We looked everywhere. The police—" She squeezed my hand, cutting me off. Her fingers were ice cold. "Listen carefully," she whispered, glancing nervously at the two men in the front seats. "Go home. Act normal. And don't tell my husband anything." The words hit me like a physical blow. Victor? What did Victor have to do with this? "I don't understand." "You will." Her grip tightened. "But you have to trust me. Can you do that?" I stared into her face, searching for answers. There were so many questions burning in my throat, but something in her expression stopped me. Fear, raw, desperate fear. "Yes," I managed. The SUV pulled over at the same spot where they'd taken me. The shorter man, I'd later learn his name was Eli Cortez, turned around with a cold smile. "Forget what you saw here, old man. Keep your mouth shut and everyone stays healthy." They pushed me out onto the sidewalk. The SUV disappeared around the corner, leaving me standing there in my running clothes, legs shaking, mind reeling. I walked home in a daze, my morning routine shattered. In my kitchen, I made coffee with trembling hands, trying to process what had just happened. Maddie was alive. She was alive, but she was in danger. And somehow, Victor was involved. That evening, Patricia called to remind me about dinner at Victor and Maddie's house. It was a weekly tradition that had continued even after Maddie's disappearance. Victor's way of keeping the family together during our time of grief. I almost canceled. How could I sit across from Victor knowing what I now knew? But Maddie's words echoed in my mind. Act normal. Victor and Maddie's house was a monument to success. Gleaming hardwood floors, granite countertops, artwork that cost more than my annual salary. Victor had built his import business from nothing, or so he claimed. At 34, he commanded respect wherever he went, with his perfectly styled black hair and expensive suits. "Frank," Victor's voice boomed as I entered the dining room. "There's our favorite engineer. How's retirement treating you?" The way he said engineer made it sound like janitor. Patricia was already seated, along with Victor's business partner, a man named Carlos Vega and his wife. Can't complain, I replied, taking my usual seat. Still running every morning like a hamster on a wheel? Victor chuckled, cutting into his steak. You know, Frank, at your age, you should be more careful. Lots of dangerous people out there. You never know who you might run into. Was that a threat? I studied his face, but Victor just smiled and took another bite. Speaking of running into people, Carlos said, did you hear about that federal task force they're setting up? Something about border security. A lot of paranoia these days. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Politicians making noise. Nothing that affects honest businessmen. The conversation moved on to safer topics, but I noticed how Victor steered it away from anything involving law enforcement or government agencies. When Patricia mentioned a news story about immigration raids, Victor quickly changed the subject to his latest legitimate import deal. As I was leaving, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single message. We'll be in touch. I deleted it immediately, but the words burned in my memory. Whatever this was, it was far from over. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. I went through the motions of my normal routine. Morning runs, avoiding Oakwood Park, grocery shopping, working in my garage workshop. But my mind was consumed with questions about Maddie. I found myself digging through old photo albums, searching for clues I might have missed. There was Maddie at her college graduation, radiant and full of possibilities. There she was at her engagement party, glowing, as Victor spun her around the dance floor. But looking closer now, I noticed things I'd overlooked before. In the later photos, her smile seemed forced. Her eyes had lost some of their brightness. I remembered the last real conversation we'd had, about 6 months before she disappeared. She'd called me late one evening, which was unusual. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. If someone you loved was involved in something questionable, what would you do? I'd assumed she was talking about office politics or some minor ethical dilemma. Depends on what you mean by questionable. Are we talking about cutting corners on a project, or something more serious? There was a long pause. Never mind, it's probably nothing. Maddie, if something's wrong, I have to go. Victor's home. She'd hung up before I could say anything else. I'd meant to call her back the next day, but work got busy, and then Patricia mentioned that Maddie seemed fine when they'd had lunch. I let it slide. 3 weeks later, Maddie vanished. The official story was that she'd left for a weekend spa trip and never returned. Her car was found at a rest stop, 2 hours outside the city, keys still in the ignition. The police investigated for months, but found no trace of foul play, no ransom demands, no body. Eventually, the case went cold. Victor played the devastated husband perfectly. He organized search parties, hired private investigators, gave tearful interviews to local news stations. The community rallied around him, and Patricia practically adopted him as the son she'd never had. Meanwhile, I was the paranoid ex-husband who couldn't accept that his daughter might have simply chosen to leave her old life behind. When I suggested that maybe Victor knew more than he was saying, Patricia accused me of being jealous of his success. You never liked him, she'd said during one particularly heated argument. You can't stand that Maddie chose someone dynamic and successful instead of settling for another boring engineer like her father. Maybe she was right about my feelings toward Victor. From the moment Maddie brought him home, something about him had rubbed me wrong. He was too smooth, too charming, too quick with explanations for his rapid financial success. But I'd kept my doubts to myself because Maddie seemed happy. Now, sitting in my home office, I pulled out the laptop I rarely used and started researching Victor's business more carefully. Delgado Imports had contracts with companies across Mexico and Central America. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Textiles, crafts, food products. But the more I dug, the more questions arose. Why did a textile import company need a warehouse in the industrial district known for its proximity to freight rail lines? Why were there so many late-night inventory transfers listed in the public business filings I could access? And why did Victor always pay in cash for everything, including the house? I was deep in research when my doorbell rang. Patricia stood on my porch, looking agitated. "We need to talk," she said, brushing past me into the living room. "About what?" "About you." She turned to face me, arms crossed. "Victor called me. He's concerned about your behavior lately." "My behavior?" "He says you've been asking strange questions, poking around his business. Frank, you need to let this go." I studied my ex-wife's face. Patricia had always been practical, cautious. At 54, she worked as a bank manager and prided herself on making sensible decisions. She'd divorced me not out of anger, but because she found our marriage unstimulating. We'd remained cordial for Maddie's sake. "What if I told you I had reason to believe Maddie didn't leave voluntarily?" Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Frank, I know this is hard. I miss her too. But making up conspiracy theories isn't going to bring her back. I'm not making anything up." "Then what evidence do you have? Real evidence, not just suspicions about Victor." I almost told her about the SUV, about seeing Maddie alive, but her words echoed in my memory. "Don't tell my husband anything. If I couldn't trust Victor, could I trust Patricia, who clearly sided with him?" "I just think there are questions that haven't been answered." Patricia sighed. "The police investigated thoroughly. The FBI was involved. If there was evidence of kidnapping or worse, they would have found it." After she left, I felt more isolated than ever. My own ex-wife thought I was losing my grip on reality. My daughter was alive but in danger, and I couldn't tell anyone without potentially making things worse for her. That evening, I drove to Casa Miguel, the Mexican restaurant where Victor often held informal business meetings. I told myself I was just getting takeout, but really, I wanted to observe. I was waiting for my order when Victor walked in with two men I didn't recognize. They took a booth in the back corner, speaking in low voices. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I noticed how the other diners seemed to give them a wide berth. As I was leaving, someone grabbed my elbow. Eli Cortez, the shorter man from the SUV, smiled at me with empty, emotionless eyes. "Bathroom. Now." In the restroom, he backed me against the wall. "You're not very good at following instructions, are you, old man?" "I don't know what you mean." "Victor says you've been asking questions, poking around where you don't belong." His hand moved to his jacket, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic. "That needs to stop." "I'm just trying to understand. Understand this. Some things are bigger than you, bigger than your family. Keep pushing, and people get hurt, people you care about." He left me there, shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. When I finally made it back to my car, I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to calm down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Maddie's warning, about Eli's threats, about the way Victor had looked at me during dinner, like I was an annoying insect he was considering stepping on. I was making coffee at 5 a.m. when I remembered something. Before Maddie disappeared, she'd asked me to help her move some boxes from her old bedroom at Patricia's house to a storage unit. I'd assumed it was just sentimental items she wanted to keep, but didn't have room for in her new house. What if there was something else in those boxes? Something she'd hidden? I called Patricia and asked if I could go through Maddie's old room, claiming I wanted to put together a memory album. She reluctantly agreed. The room had been preserved exactly as Maddie left it when she moved in with Victor. Posters from her college years, bookshelves filled with engineering textbooks and novels, a desk where she'd done homework throughout high school. I searched methodically, the way I approached engineering problems. Desk drawers, closet shelves, even the space behind her headboard. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about her old jewelry box. The bottom seemed too shallow compared to the outside dimensions. I pressed and prodded until I found a hidden compartment. Inside was a USB drive with a single date written on it in Maddie's handwriting, the day before she disappeared. My hands trembled as I pocketed the drive. Whatever was on it, Maddie had thought it important enough to hide, and now it might be the key to understanding what had happened to her. As I left Patricia's house, I noticed a familiar black SUV parked across the street. It pulled away as soon as I got in my car, but the message was clear. I was being watched. The game, whatever it was, had moved to the next level. Back in my home office, I stared at the USB drive for a long time before plugging it into my laptop. Whatever was on it had been important enough for Maddie to hide, and dangerous enough for her to warn me against trusting Victor. The drive contained dozens of files, spreadsheets, scanned documents, photos, and what appeared to be encrypted messages. As I scrolled through them, a picture began to emerge that sent a chill through me. The spreadsheets contained names, dates, and dollar amounts. The names were mostly Hispanic, and the dates corresponded to what looked like scheduled deliveries. The amounts ranged from $50,000 to $500,000 per entry. The scanned documents were even more damning. Invoices for textile shipments that listed weights and quantities that didn't match any legitimate import records I could find. There were also maps marking routes from various points along the Mexican border to locations throughout the southwestern United States. But it was the photos that made everything crystal clear. Victor shaking hands with men in expensive suits outside warehouses, Eli supervising the loading of unmarked trucks, and most disturbing of all, groups of well-dressed individuals being escorted across remote stretches of desert. These weren't desperate families seeking a better life. These were cartel members, men and women whose expensive clothes and confident bearing marked them as anything but refugees. Victor wasn't just facilitating illegal border crossings, he was providing safe passage for criminal organizations. I spent hours going through every file, my engineering mind cataloging and cross-referencing the information. By the time I finished, I had a clear picture of an operation that moved high-value cartel personnel across the border for substantial fees. Victor's import business was the perfect cover, providing legitimate reasons for trucks to travel back and forth across the border. The encrypted messages were harder to decipher, but I managed to crack a few using basic substitution codes. They revealed communication between Victor and someone identified only as El Jefe, discussing payment schedules and special packages that needed discreet handling. One message made my hands shake. Package M becoming problem, asking too many questions, may need permanent solution. Package M. Madeline. I leaned back in my chair, mind racing. Maddie had discovered Victor's operation and tried to gather evidence. When she became too much of a threat, they'd made her disappear. But why keep her alive? Why the elaborate charade of letting me see her? The answer came to me slowly. Leverage. As long as I stayed quiet and didn't push too hard, Maddie remained alive. But if I went to the police or caused too much trouble, they'd eliminate both of us. I needed help, but who could I trust? Patricia was clearly in Victor's corner. The local police might be compromised. Victor had connections throughout the community. I needed someone with real authority, someone outside Victor's sphere of influence. That's when I remembered my old friend Darren Price. We'd known each other since college, and he'd built a successful law practice specializing in federal cases. If anyone could point me in the right direction, it was Darren. I called him from a payphone downtown, feeling paranoid but not caring. Frank? Jesus, I haven't heard from you in months. How are you holding up? Darren, I need to see you. It's about Maddie. There was a pause. Frank, you know I'd do anything to help, but if this is about hiring another private investigator, it's not. I have information, real information, but I need to know who I can trust. We arranged to meet at his office that evening. Darren's law firm occupied the top floor of a downtown building, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. He looked the part of a successful attorney, silver hair, tailored suit, confident demeanor. What's this about, Frank? I handed him a printed summary of what I'd found on the USB drive, leaving out the details of how I'd obtained it. Darren's expression grew increasingly grim as he read, "Where did you get this? Does it matter? Is it enough to start an investigation?" He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "Frank, this is serious stuff. If even half of this is accurate, we're talking about federal crimes, human trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy. Then you'll help me take it to the authorities?" "I'll help you, but we need to be smart about this. Victor has money and connections. If we move too fast or make mistakes, evidence could disappear, and witnesses could be intimidated." "Or worse," I said, thinking of Maddie. "Exactly. We need to document everything carefully, build an airtight case, and find the right federal contact, someone with the authority and resources to take this on." Over the next week, I became a man obsessed. During the day, I maintained my normal routine. Morning runs, now on a different route, grocery shopping, casual conversations with neighbors. But every evening, I worked with Darren to organize the evidence and research Victor's operation. We discovered that Delgado Imports had connections to companies throughout Mexico, many of which had been investigated by federal authorities for cartel ties. Victor's warehouse was located in a perfect position for both legitimate shipping and discreet transfers to vehicles bound for other parts of the country. I also began my own surveillance operation. Using skills I'd developed as an engineer, attention to detail, patience, systematic observation, I started tracking Victor's movements. I noted when he visited the warehouse, who he met with, what vehicles came and went. It was during one of these surveillance sessions that I nearly got caught. I was parked across from the warehouse, using binoculars to observe a late-night meeting, when Eli appeared at my passenger window. "Enjoying the show, old man?" My heart hammered as he got into the car uninvited. I was just what? Just accidentally parked here at midnight with binoculars? He leaned closer, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. "You're starting to irritate me, Frank. And when I get irritated, things tend to go wrong." I forced myself to remain calm, remembering the small digital recorder I'd started carrying. "I couldn't sleep. Sometimes I drive around when I have insomnia." "That's nonsense." But he sounded less certain now. "You're playing a risky game. Games have consequences." After he left, I sat in my car for another hour, making sure I wasn't followed home. The recording wasn't great quality, but it captured enough of his threats to be useful. That weekend, Maddie appeared at the grocery store. I was in the produce section when I felt someone brush against me. A piece of paper was pressed into my hand so quickly I almost missed it. "Don't turn around," Maddie's voice whispered behind me. "Don't react." I continued examining apples while she spoke quietly. "They're getting suspicious. Victor knows someone's been watching the warehouse. Be more careful. Are you safe?" "For now. But Dad, what you're doing, it's working. Keep going, but don't let them catch you." She was gone before I could respond, melting into the crowd of weekend shoppers. The note she'd given me contained a single line. "Storage Unit 247, West Side Self-Storage, key taped under your mailbox." That night, I retrieved the key and drove to the storage facility. Unit 247 was small, containing only a few boxes and a filing cabinet. Inside the cabinet, I found additional evidence, financial records, more photos, and detailed notes in Maddie's handwriting documenting Victor's operation. One note made my anger flare. V confronted me today, said if I don't stop being paranoid, something unfortunate could happen, like what happened to the accountant who asked too many questions. I later learned the accountant, Maria Santos, was lost in a traffic incident last year. No witnesses. My daughter had been living in fear, gathering evidence while knowing she was risking her life. The courage that must have taken made me proud and terrified in equal measure. As I was loading the boxes into my car, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Harper, this is Agent Riley Thompson with the Department of Homeland Security. I think we need to talk." My hands went numb. I don't know what you mean. Mr. Harper, we've been investigating Victor Delgado for some time. We know about your daughter's disappearance, and we know you've been asking questions. We'd like to help each other. I looked around the empty storage facility, suddenly feeling very exposed. How do I know you're really federal law enforcement? Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Federal Building downtown, room 847. Come alone, and bring whatever evidence you've collected. It's time to stop playing detective and start working with professionals. The call abruptly ended. I stood there in the darkness, holding a phone and a key to secrets that could ruin my son-in-law's life or put my daughter in grave danger. Either way, there was no going back now. Agent Riley Thompson was not what I'd expected. 42 years old, average height, with graying brown hair, and the kind of steady gaze that suggested she'd seen enough of the world's darkness to remain unimpressed by most of it. Her office in the Federal Building was spartanly furnished: desk, chairs, filing cabinets, and a wall covered with photos and documents connected by red string. Mr. Harper, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. I remained standing, studying the wall display. Several photos showed Victor in various locations, meeting with different people. Others showed the warehouse, trucks, and what appeared to be surveillance footage from border crossings. How long have you been watching him? About 18 months. Your son-in-law runs a sophisticated operation that's been extremely difficult to break into. She gestured to a chair. Please, we have a lot to discuss. I sat down, placing the briefcase containing copies of all my evidence on the floor beside me. Victor Delgado provides high-end transportation services for cartel personnel who need to enter the United States discreetly, Thompson continued. We're not talking about desperate families seeking asylum. These are individuals with significant criminal records who pay substantial fees for safe passage and new identities. How much do you know about my daughter's involvement? Thompson's expression softened slightly. We know she discovered the operation and began collecting evidence. We also know she disappeared before she could bring that evidence to us. She's alive. The words came out before I could stop them. Thompson leaned forward. What makes you say that? I hesitated. Telling a federal agent about my abduction would mean admitting I'd withheld information from law enforcement. But if I wanted their help saving Maddie, I had to trust someone. I told her everything. The SUV, seeing Maddie, her warnings, the evidence I'd found. Thompson listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. Mr. Harper, why didn't you come to us immediately? Because my daughter told me not to trust anyone. Because I didn't know if local law enforcement might be compromised. Because I was scared. She nodded slowly. Those aren't unreasonable concerns. Victor has cultivated relationships throughout the community, including with some law enforcement personnel. Your caution may have saved your daughter's life. What happens now? Now we work together. You continue your normal routine, but you also help us gather the specific evidence we need to build a federal case. We need documentation of financial transactions, recorded conversations, and witness testimony. What about Maddie? Once we have enough evidence to move, we'll coordinate a simultaneous operation to arrest Victor and his associates while securing your daughter's safety. But that requires patience and careful planning. She handed me a small device that looked like a pen. Digital recorder, better quality than whatever you've been using. Also, we'll need you to attend social functions where Victor will be present. Can you do that without arousing suspicion? There's a charity fundraiser at the community center next weekend. Victor always attends those events. Perfect. He'll be relaxed, confident, surrounded by people who admire him. That's when people make mistakes. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the role of federal informant with the same methodical approach I'd once applied to engineering projects. I practiced using the recording device, memorized the list of names and topics Thompson wanted me to focus on, and prepared myself mentally for what felt like the performance of my lifetime. The charity fundraiser was exactly the kind of event Victor thrived in. The community center was decorated with balloons and banners, filled with local business leaders, politicians, and wealthy donors. Victor worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, making jokes, accepting praise for his generous contributions to local causes. I played my part perfectly, the grieving father still struggling with his daughter's disappearance, grateful for Victor's continued inclusion in family events. People patted my shoulder sympathetically and praised Victor for his loyalty to Maddie's memory. "Frank!" Victor's voice boomed across the room. "There's my favorite engineer. Come meet the mayor." I spent 20 minutes making small talk with various dignitaries while Victor basked in their admiration. He was completely in his element, confident and relaxed. My opportunity came when Victor stepped outside with Eli and Carlos to smoke cigars. I followed at a discreet distance, positioning myself near an open window where I could hear their conversation. "The shipment next Tuesday is special," Victor was saying. 3 packages, very high value. El Jefe is paying double the usual rate. "Security?" Eli asked. "Extra precautions. These packages have federal attention in Mexico. They need to disappear completely once they're here." "What about the old man?" Carlos gestured toward the building. "He's been asking questions again." Victor laughed. "Frank? He's harmless. A broken-down engineer living in the past. Even if he suspected something, who would believe him?" "Still think we should handle it permanently," Eli muttered. "And draw more federal attention?" "No. As long as his daughter stays cooperative, he'll behave. Besides, having him around makes me look good. The devoted son-in-law who takes care of his grieving father-in-law." I recorded every word, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and satisfaction. Victor's arrogance was finally working against him. When I returned to the party, I found Maddie standing near the refreshment table. She looked pale but composed, wearing a blue dress that had always been one of my favorites. "Dad." She hugged me carefully, and I felt her slip something into my jacket pocket. "It's good to see you." "You too, sweetheart." I kept my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Much better lately." Her eyes met mine briefly, and I saw a flicker of hope there. "I think things might be looking up soon." Victor appeared beside us, wrapping his arm around Maddie's waist possessively. "There's my beautiful wife. Frank, doesn't she look wonderful? I've been taking such good care of her." "She looks lovely," I managed. "We should get going," Victor said. "Early day tomorrow. Business calls, you know." As they left, Victor shook my hand with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Thanks for being here, Frank. Family is everything, isn't it?" "Yes," I replied. "Family is everything." Later that night, in my garage, I examined what Maddie had given me. It was a ledger, handwritten in Victor's distinctive script, detailing payments and schedules for the past 6 months. Every transaction was documented, including the names of cartel members who'd been transported and their final destinations. I photographed every page and uploaded the images to the secure server Thompson had given me access to. Then I called the number she'd provided. "We got it," I said when she answered. "All of it?" "Everything. Financial records, recorded conversations, documented threats. When do we move?" "Soon. There's one more event we need you to attend. Victor's hosting an anniversary celebration at your family church next Sunday. We want to make the arrest there, in front of the entire community." "Why?" "Because Victor's power comes from his reputation. When that reputation is destroyed publicly, completely, it sends a message to his associates and prevents him from rebuilding his operation." After hanging up, I sat in my garage workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that had once defined my quiet life. In a few days, everything would change. Victor would be in federal custody, Maddie would be safe, and the truth would finally be revealed. But first, I had to survive one more family gathering, One more evening of playing the harmless, grieving father-in-law while my son-in-law celebrated his success. One more performance before the final act. Sunday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood as I prepared for what I knew would be the most important day of my life. I dressed carefully in my best suit, navy blue, conservative, the kind of outfit that made me invisible at social gatherings. Today, that invisibility would be my greatest asset. The recording device was clipped inside my jacket pocket, tested and ready. In my briefcase, I carried copies of every piece of evidence Darren and I had compiled over the past month. Agent Thompson had assured me that federal agents would be positioned throughout the church, but the plan required me to take the lead. "You know him best," she'd explained during our final briefing. "You understand his psychology, his weaknesses. When the moment comes, you'll know exactly what to say to make him reveal himself." At 11 a.m., I met Darren at his office for a final review. We'd spent the previous evening preparing my statement and organizing the evidence into a presentation that could be understood quickly by both law enforcement and civilians. "You don't have to do this, Frank," Darren said as we reviewed the documents one last time. "Thompson could handle the arrest without involving you directly." "No." I closed the briefcase with a sharp click. "Victor has spent 2 years making me feel powerless, irrelevant. He's hidden behind his charm and community standing while holding my daughter prisoner. I want him to know that the harmless old engineer brought him down. Just remember, once you start talking, there's no going back. Your relationship with Patricia, your standing in the community, everything changes. It already changed the day Maddie disappeared. I'm just finally doing something about it." The church was packed when I arrived. St. Matthew's Episcopal had been our family's church for over 20 years, and the anniversary celebration had drawn members from throughout the community. Victor had chosen the venue perfectly, surrounded by friends, family, and admirers, in a place associated with truth and moral authority. Patricia greeted me at the entrance, looking elegant in a black dress and pearls. "Frank, I'm so glad you came. This means a lot to Victor." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, scanning the crowd for Agent Thompson. I spotted her near the back, dressed conservatively and blending in perfectly with the other attendees. Victor held court near the altar, accepting congratulations and praise from a steady stream of well-wishers. He wore an expensive charcoal suit and his most charming smile, every inch the successful businessman and devoted husband. "Frank," he strode over and embraced me warmly. "Thank you for being here. Family means everything, especially during difficult times." "Of course. How are you holding up?" "Some days are harder than others, but the community support has been incredible, and having family like you makes all the difference." The irony was suffocating. Victor was using my presence to enhance his image as a caring family man, while simultaneously holding my daughter captive to ensure my silence. Maddie appeared beside him, and my heart clenched at how fragile she looked. But when our eyes met, I saw something new there: determination. "Dad, would you walk with me for a minute?" We stepped outside into the church courtyard, away from the crowd. "It's today, isn't it?" she whispered. "How did you know?" "I can see it in your face. You look like you did when I was little, and you were about to fix something that everyone else said was broken." She squeezed my hand. "I have something for you." She handed me a folded paper. "Victor's schedule for the next 2 weeks, including a meeting with El Jefe on Tuesday. If anything goes wrong today, this might be useful." "Nothing's going wrong. By tonight, you'll be free. Dad, I need you to know, whatever happens in there, I'm proud of you. You never gave up on me." Before I could respond, Victor appeared in the doorway. "There you are. They're ready for my speech." We returned to the sanctuary, where chairs had been arranged in rows facing a small podium. Victor took his position at the front, and I found a seat in the 3rd row, close enough to be seen clearly, but far enough back to avoid immediate confrontation. "Friends, family, Fellow community members, Victor began, his voice carrying easily through the space. Thank you for joining us today as we celebrate not just my anniversary with my beloved Madeline, but the bonds that hold our community together. He spoke eloquently about love, loss, and resilience, about how the community had supported him through the difficult year since Maddie's disappearance, about his commitment to honoring her memory through continued service and philanthropy. Some of you have asked how I find the strength to continue, he said, his voice catching with apparent emotion. The answer is simple: family. Even in our darkest moments, we must support each other. We must trust each other. We must protect each other. The crowd murmured approval. Several people wiped away tears. Victor was delivering a masterful performance. Which brings me to someone very special, Victor continued, gesturing toward me. Frank Harper, my father-in-law, has been a pillar of strength throughout this ordeal. Despite his own grief, he's remained a constant presence in our lives. Frank, would you like to say a few words? This wasn't part of the plan. Thompson had expected Victor to finish his speech before I made my move, but Victor was offering me the perfect opening. I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the sanctuary turn toward me. My legs felt unsteady, but my voice was clear when I spoke. Thank you, Victor. You're right about family being everything, and you're right about trust and protection being essential. I paused, looking around the room at faces I'd known for years. That's why I need to tell everyone here the truth about what happened to Madeline. A murmur ran through the crowd. Victor's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. Frank, I know this is emotional. Madeline didn't leave voluntarily, I continued, my voice growing stronger. She was taken. She's been held captive for over a year, and the man responsible is standing right there. The sanctuary erupted in shocked whispers. Victor stepped forward, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. Frank, you're clearly upset. Maybe you should sit down. I've been quiet too long. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the evidence folder. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor Delgado is not the man you think he is. He runs a criminal organization that facilitates illegal border crossings for cartel members. My daughter discovered his operation and tried to expose it. When she became a threat, he made her disappear. The sanctuary fell silent except for the rustle of papers as I opened the evidence folder. Victor's face had gone pale, but he quickly recovered, forcing a concerned smile. Frank, this is clearly a very difficult day for you. Grief can cause... Grief didn't create these financial records, I interrupted, holding up the ledger Maddie had given me. Grief didn't forge these photographs of you meeting with known cartel associates, and grief certainly didn't record your voice discussing high-value packages and threatening my daughter's life. I activated the digital recorder, and Victor's voice filled the sanctuary. As long as his daughter stays cooperative, he'll behave. The crowd's shocked murmurs grew louder. Patricia stood up from her seat, her face white with confusion and dawning horror. Frank, what is this? She demanded. This is the truth, Patricia. The truth about what Victor really does for a living. The truth about why Maddie disappeared. The truth about the man we've all been protecting. Victor stepped closer to the podium, his charm finally cracking. This is insane. Frank has clearly had some kind of breakdown. These are fabricated. Agent Thompson, I called out, looking toward the back of the sanctuary. I think it's time. Riley Thompson stood up, her federal badge clearly visible as she moved down the center aisle. Behind her, 3 other agents emerged from various positions throughout the crowd. Victor Delgado, Thompson announced, her voice carrying absolute authority. You're under arrest for human trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, and multiple violations of federal immigration law. The sanctuary exploded into chaos. People stood, shouted questions, pushed toward the exits. Victor backed away from the approaching agents, his eyes wild with panic. This is a setup. Frank is lying. He's been obsessed with me since Maddie left. Mr. Delgado, Thompson continued, now close enough to reach for her handcuffs. We have 18 months of surveillance evidence, financial records, recorded conversations, and witness testimony. You have the right to remain silent." "Witness testimony?" Victor's voice cracked. "What witnesses?" That's when Maddie stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the side door. The entire crowd turned to stare at her, gasps and cries echoing through the sanctuary. "Hello, Victor," she said quietly. Patricia screamed. Several people fainted. Victor staggered backward as if he'd been struck. "Maddie!" Patricia rushed toward her daughter. "Oh God, Maddie, where have you been?" "I've been where Victor put me," Maddie replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "In a series of safe houses and warehouses, kept alive as insurance against my father's cooperation." Victor's last façade crumbled completely. "You don't understand. These people, the cartels, they don't negotiate. If I hadn't cooperated, none of us would have made it out unharmed." "Cooperated?" I stepped down from the podium, facing my son-in-law directly. "You built this operation, Victor. You recruited the contacts, established the routes, collected the payments. You weren't a victim. You were the architect." Agent Thompson moved behind Victor as two other agents flanked him. "Victor Delgado, you're under arrest. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Frank, you don't know what you've done," Victor snarled, his mask finally completely removed. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a pathetic old man who couldn't protect his own daughter?" "You're right," I said calmly. "I couldn't protect her from you, but I could gather evidence. I could work with federal law enforcement. I could document every crime, record every threat, and build the case that's going to put you in prison for the rest of your life." The handcuffs clicked shut around Victor's wrists. As the agents led him toward the exit, he turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Frank. You have no idea how many people are involved in this, how far up it goes. You think arresting me solves anything?" "It solves everything that matters to me," I replied. "My daughter is free." The scene shifted abruptly to the courthouse lobby 2 hours later. News crews had assembled outside, their cameras capturing Victor being led through the building in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. Eli Cortez and 3 other associates were also in custody, part of the coordinated arrests Agent Thompson had orchestrated. Patricia stood beside me, still in shock, watching as reporters shouted questions at Victor. Maddie held my arm tightly, as if afraid I might disappear. "Mr. Harper!" A reporter thrust a microphone toward me. "How long have you known about your son-in-law's criminal activities?" No comment. Agent Thompson intervened, guiding us toward a side entrance. But I stopped, looking back at the courthouse steps where Victor was being loaded into a federal transport vehicle. For just a moment, our eyes met through the bulletproof glass. He was no longer the charming, successful businessman who had commanded respect throughout our community. He was just a criminal in handcuffs, facing decades in federal prison. The man who had made me feel powerless and irrelevant had been brought down by the methodical, careful work he'd always dismissed as boring. "Mr. Harper," another reporter called out, "what do you want people to know about this case?" I looked at the cameras, at the crowd of onlookers, at the federal agents who had trusted me to help them build their case. "I want people to know that the truth always comes out eventually," I said, "and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up on the people you love." The heavy courthouse doors slammed shut behind Victor's transport vehicle, the sound echoing through the lobby like a final verdict. I stood there watching through the glass as the vehicle disappeared into traffic, taking with it the man who had terrorized my family and corrupted my community. It was over. Victor Delgado would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, and my daughter was finally free. The quiet, methodical engineer had won.